Right, we're now live, are we? Jolly good. It's 2 o'clock. We will commence with the Governance and Audit Committee meeting on Wednesday, the 29th of September, 2021. Oh, how the time passes. Apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Sue Woolley and Councillor Gloria Johnson. Councillor Breda Griffin will be acting as substitute for Councillor Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, disclosure of interest. Members are asked to disclose any interest in matters for consideration at the meeting.
Chair.
Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask for clarification about the status of this meeting, whether or not it's been called in compliance with the Local Government Act 1972, Section 100. If someone could clarify, I'd be grateful, because as you probably know, a notice wasn't put on the offices, although it was put on the website.
I'm unaware of that, so I'll ask the Deputy.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Baxter is quite right that the notice wasn't placed on the notice board. As a result, but that hasn't been the case for a number of meetings. It is there now, albeit it is too late. However, we have posted the details and the summons on our website, and it's my view that that is proper service of having posted it. Now that may be open to challenge if somebody wished to challenge that position in law, but I would suggest that we have properly served notice on everybody that we're having a meeting today, and therefore we're okay to continue.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Baxter?
Yes, thank you. With those executive has made, I'm happy to proceed on those on that basis, and hope that we've learned the lesson as we go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go to agenda item 3. The minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of July 2021. I'll like to propose these. Have I a seconder? Thank you, Mark Whittington. Are there any comments? The only comment I've got on these is on page 7, where it says that we'll receive an update report in 3 months on the planning services review. That has not been put on the work plan. It will now be put on the work plan for October, and hope that we will receive an update at that time. Thank you. We'll move to a vote then, if we've no other points. All those in favour? Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Chair, I wasn't at the meeting. I have no problems with the meetings, but I better abstain because I was absent. From
That's
the meeting.
fine. You are allowed to vote if you do support them, according to our previous monitoring officer.
Thank you.
Oh dear, I forgot the microphone. Updates from the previous meeting. Are there any apart from what we've got through? No, right. I'll go to the external audit plan 2021. I believe Paul Harvey is here from Grant Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I'd like to do is apologise. This audit plan should have come to you for your July meeting, but due to some long-term illness of the prior director, John Gregory, we missed that meeting, so it's come to this meeting. You'll also notice on the audit plan that we now have a new engagement partner called Paul Cuttle. Again, he sends his apologies. He couldn't make it today due to the upcoming sign off of audits at the end of September. He lives down near London, so it was a long commute for him for this meeting, but he's intending to come to your next meeting to present our audit findings report. So this is our external audit plan for the 2021 year. As from previous audit plans, it's very similar to the previous ones that we've presented for prior years. Probably the main new addition is a slide on group accounts. For 1920 was the first year that you produced group accounts. 2021 is your second year, but it's the first year where we've actually issued the audit plan in the knowledge that you will be producing group accounts. So there's an extra slide on there setting out the members on, it's on page 19. It shows out what the scope of the group audit is. So it's the Council and Gravitas Limited. And it just shows what work we're going to undertake on the group. Following on to that, page 20 is our significant risks. There's 4 significant risks. 2 are mandated by the international auditing standards. The first one's the fraudulent revenue recognition. This one is allowed to be rebutted, and following our planning work, we've been able to rebut this risk and say that it's not considered a risk for the council or the group. The second one's management override of controls. This is, as I said, this is the other mandatory risk. We're not saying that there is management override of controls, but we have to undertake work to satisfy ourselves that there isn't any override of controls. We mainly do this through looking at journals, through our audit work. The next significant risk is valuation of land and buildings. Obviously, this is one of the largest figures in your accounts. It's also the valuation uses estimation techniques, and you actually employ a valuer to undertake these valuations. Therefore, we have to do quite a bit of work around valuations to assure ourselves that they've been calculated correctly and that there's nothing untoward. And then the final one is the valuation of pension fund net liability. Again, this is probably the second biggest figure in your accounts. It's also subject to estimation techniques. Through the pension fund, you employ an expert, the actuary, on the pension fund to value this. So we just have to make sure that the process they've gone through is appropriate. If you move on to page 23, for 2021, there's a new international auditing standard in relation to estimates. This increases the amount of work we do, and it also brings, as part of that, we have to bring to your attention and gain your understanding of what you consider the main estimates are for the year. So page 23 just takes you through what we're asking you to do. And then on page 26, other matters, other work, as in previous years, it's not just the financial statements we look at. We look at the narrative report, the annual governance statement, and we also consider going concern for the council. Page 26 takes you through a change this year. Practice note 10 was issued, which changes the amount of work we have to do on going concern. For the public sector, it actually makes it a lot easier because the assumption is that you are a going concern because of continuity of service. If the council ceased to exist or was merged into a different council, the services you provide would still continue. Therefore, that's the main premise of the assumption of going concern. Page 27, materiality. There's no change in materiality from the prior years. We based it on prior year gross expenditure. So moving on to page 28, value for money arrangements. There is a revised approach to value for money for 2021 that's been implemented by the National Audit Office. Perhaps in hindsight, 2021 was not the best year to introduce this, given what's been going on with COVID. But what it means is that we'll be doing a more detailed piece of work. In the past, we just looked and we undertook the work based on significant risks that we'd identified and gave you a conclusion that was either qualified or unqualified. This year and going forward, it's a different point. We look at the 3 areas which are improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, financial sustainability and governance, and we give you a narrative report and describing what your processes are and whether we've identified any significant risks. We no longer give a qualified, unqualified opinion, but more there'll be recommendations coming out of that. This is, as I've said, this is a larger piece of work than we normally undertake. So this work will be undertaken between now and December. Moving on to page 29 is just the timescale of the work and what the roles of the audit team will be. Moving on to page 30, this sets out the audit fees. I should notice the proposed fee for 2021 is higher than 1920. Page 31 takes you through this detailed analysis of the increase and the decreases. The main differences between them are obviously in 1920 there was the impact of COVID and the additional time it took to audit the accounts. At the moment for 2021, we're not anticipating charging any extra for COVID, so that's come out. And then the two other bits are the additional work required for the value for money conclusion required by the NAO. As I've said, this is a substantial piece of work that was not included in the scale fee originally. And also the increased audit requirements to the revised ISAs around estimation technique, again, was not included in the fee when the scale fee was set. So that's some additional money. And that's it. Appendix 1 just takes you through the new standards. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, that's a brief explanation as to why you've increased the fees. You know, everything seems to have come down. The PSAA, I know I've given you instructions to do different things, but it doesn't cancel other things that you're doing. So I'm not impressed with the fact that you've increased your fees for possibly less work and later work, because the accounts should have been presented to this meeting for signing, because it is the September. So it's going to be late in October and you've not completed the accounts now. Very unimpressed by it. Vice Chairman would like to ask some questions.
Yeah, thank you. I've got some questions on, you've identified 3 on page 18, significant risks. You've only identified 3 significant risks, which I find I'd have thought there'd be more than 3 significant risks. That's the first point. I don't know. And from what you said, you seem to identify the risk because of the monetary value of them. I don't know whether you pick on the highest value ones to actually say they're more significant risk, because I can understand that from a point of view, but I would have thought there would be more than those 3 significant risks. And in particular, you've identified one, the valuation of the pension fund. Now, I'm aware that the County Council run the pension fund, and I'm aware that we contribute to it, but I can't see why. And I know that can vary depending on the state of the pension fund, but could you explain a little bit more why you consider that as a significant risk? I don't quite fully understand that. So those are my 2 points, really. Why are they not more significant risks than I thought they would be? And in particular, why is the pension fund listed as a significant risk?
Just because there's only 3 significant risks, that doesn't mean that we're not doing any work on the other balances. We're still undertaking detailed audit work on all the other material balances within your accounts. What significant risk does is it identifies where we just got to put more attention and we elevate the risk and undertake. And the 2 that we've, ignoring the management override of controls, which is, as I've said, is a mandatory significant risk. The other 2 are subject to estimation techniques, which means that the value of them can materially change by the process that's undertaking. So in the pension fund, there are a number of assumptions, and if they change by 1%, that can have a difference of several £million. And it's the same for property, plant and equipment. If a different discount rate is used, or the rental yield, or the square footage, that can have a huge difference in the value of a property. Therefore, we just need to be, because you use work of experts, we need to be happy how they've arrived at those values, which is why they're significant risks. And I take your point that the pension fund is not administered by you, but it's a figure that appears in your financial statements, and it's one that is highly complex. to arrive at that figure. So we just need to make sure that the process has been undertaken and that the actuary has actually arrived at the correct figure in the accounts.
Come back to you about the pension fund. Am I right? I might be wrong on that. We obviously pay a contribution into it. Links County Council run it, but doesn't our contribution? It's not. I thought it didn't alter every year. I thought that was a triannual assessment of what councils have to contribute to it. I thought it was fairly stable year by year, but then every sort of 3 or 4 years it gets amended. Am I right or am I wrong on that fact?
You're right on that. Every 3 years you get notified of what your contributions are for the year, which obviously get paid into the pension fund. So as part, we will audit that as part of our work on the pension net liability. The figure that the net liability figure is your share of the liability of the pension fund. So obviously all of the committed bodies, which is mainly Lincolnshire, pay into it and it's invested, but what the actuaries do is calculate the liability for all of the pensioners and future pensioners. And then that is offset against the assets of the pension fund. And then that is obviously there's lots of emitted bodies and that is split proportionally between them. So this is your share. So your contributions don't have a direct impact correlation to your share. It depends on the emitted bodies and the number of pensioners and future pensioners you have that commit. So you can't just say, well, we pay X%, so we get X% of the pension fund. It's a more detailed calculation which the pension fund administer, and then they split it out and they actually calculates what your share of the overall pension fund is.
Councillor Whittington, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report. Actually, I find it very, very detailed, very informative. Actually, I've only really got one question on it, and it relates to yes, page 19, where you are talking about group accounts and the work that you obviously got started to undertake this year, because we're preparing group accounts that's going to involve the accounts of both SKDC and Gravitas. My understanding from a previous meeting I've been at, I think it was FedCo, that Leisure SK was going to be included in the group accounts this year. Or maybe misunderstood, but is that right? Because I'm assuming you may have to do some work around Leisure SK. Am I right in that? Or perhaps the section 151 officer, Richard Wells, can help. Thanks much, Nick. Thank you.
Leisure SK wasn't formed until January 2021. Yeah. Therefore, you wouldn't have a full year accounts.
Unless, well, group accounting rules would suggest you can do a partial year for group accounts.
I suspect they will run to 31st of March 2022, as opposed to doing a short period.
It will be
but
interesting.
Richard will clarify that.
So when we were looking at the group structure, obviously Gravitas is not the only subsidiary that you have. So when forming the group accounts, officers have to make a decision on on the grounds of materiality, what should and shouldn't be included in the group accounts. So obviously Invest SK and what's the maintenance one called? Enviro SK were deemed not material, so they were excluded. Leisure SK, as the chair quite rightly said, was formed in January. So the first 3 months, it wasn't deemed to be material. Obviously, going forward, officers anticipate that it will be material. So for the 21-22 year, we expect Leisure SK to be within the group accounts boundary and will be included in the group accounts. We're still in discussions of how we will achieve that, obviously, because I think there's plans for a 15-month first year because it's a new company. So we'll just have to, we'll look at that in the 21-22 audit.
Okay.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I've got a degree in public administration. I've worked for local government for well over a decade. I've been a councillor for 6 years, and I've been on all the mandatory training courses for this committee, and I thought I'd understood it, but I don't know what I am supposed to learn from this report. It looks as if I mean, I'm trying to identify anything in here other than the front page that would be different for us than it would for any of the other authorities that you churn out the same report for £60,000 in each year. So within this report, the one that I was interested in was page 21, management override of controls. Then you said that that's a mandatory risk anyway. So every authority gets this risk. Within this report, where does it tell us whether or not you have found any significant risks at SKDC? And is the blandness of this report due to the high quality of our accounts and services? How would a bad report look different? And with regard to following up on Councillor Whittington, one of my major concerns, and it's not a kind of major I'm going to run to the government with it concern, but one of my principal concerns about the management of finance in this council is the management within Invest SK and to a lesser extent Leisure SK and Environment SK, and also the extent to which controls such as procurement regulations are overridden. Where do I find that in here? What's this report got to do with South Kesteven and our circumstance that wouldn't apply to any authority anywhere else?
Just a minute. This is actually the audit plan of what they're going to do or what they propose to do. It's not telling you what's happened and what they found.
Well, thank you. Thank you for clarifying why it appears so bland, I guess, because they haven't found anything. They're just saying what they're going to look for. However, I still can't see anything in here that says, well, we're arriving at SKDC, so therefore we're particularly interested in Gravitas or Invest SK or the way that the finance thing is. You're saying that we're going to be charged £60,000 for this work when it gets done, as we do most years and a little bit more. I still would like an explanation as to how this differs from any other council in the country.
Well, it probably won't necessarily be that Grant Thornton does, but it probably would be for any other auditors around the country. They would come up with a similar plan, but let they offer that.
Thank you, Chair. I think due to the nature of the business that you're in, for a lot of district councils, the same risks will appear, which is perhaps why you think that the plan is bland. Every every council has a pension liability. Every council has asset invest in council buildings and in property, plant and equipment. There are nuances. So you have an HRA, some don't. So the county councils don't have collection funds, but these are the generic risks for auditing the figures within the accounts. The bits that you've raised in concerns around governance of the subsidiaries, that's something we'll be looking at as part of the VFM conclusion, where we look at one of the aspects is that we look at corporate governance. So at the end of it, we will be producing an audit finding report for the audit of the financial statements, but we will also be producing an annual auditor's report, which will give our conclusion on the VFM. And that will be a detailed thing saying, this is what we found when we're looking at your arrangements for governance, your financial standing, and that will be tailored and more detailed and specific to South Kesteven, because it's the nature of those ones where not every council does everything the same way. So that's why this audit plan, I guess that's my answer. The audit plan, the same risks would be around for every council, but this is our annual audit plan. The audit findings report will be tailored towards South Kesteven in more detail and saying what the actual circumstances are for the council.
Thank you for that, Councillor Baxter. This, to me, is late. The audit plan should have come in March when they were starting the commencement of the audit. We should now be discussing what they found and the accounts. It's very disappointing that it is late.
Yes, I tend to agree, but also we're just being presented with this for noting. this is what you're going to get, this is what everybody else gets. There's nothing particular. Is there anything that we could usefully say to it to oh, actually I'd rather tweak here or tweak there? It's just here you are, this is what you're going to get. We're now going to crack on with it. Yeah, thanks.
That's basically what we're doing. We're noting it. I would like to ask either Richard or Paul what the future holds for this, because it is changing after the end of 2022. And I've had an email from Tony Crawley at the PAA explaining what will happen. And I'm sure that one of them would like to explain to the committee.
I'm happy to do that, Chair. So obviously, I think it was 3 years ago, you opted into the PSAA framework contract for your audit, for procuring your external audit services. That was for a 5-year contract. That's coming to an end at the end of, I think it's 22-23. So what PSAA are now doing is they're starting that process again and offering you the chance to opt into their framework to procure the service. You don't have to do it. You can go out and procure your own external audit services. The choice is yours. But yeah, it's just the start of the process. So you need to formally go through your processes to decide whether you'd like to opt into the PSAA contract. And that, yeah, I think that's what's going on.
And just to add to that, the deadline for the council to decide whether it wants to opt into the national procurement is the 11th of March next year. So our intention is to bring the options forward for the committee, but ultimately it's a council decision. So it'll form part of the budget papers that we'll present to council in March 22, and there'll be a recommendation to either opt in or as Paul says, opt out.
Thank you for those. I thought the committee should be made aware of what is likely in the future. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 6. Appointment of internal auditors. Are you starting this, Richard?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the report this afternoon, which is in accordance with the terms of reference of the committee, is to consider the new internal audit arrangements from next April, so that's April 22. Members will be aware we've been with RSM for a number of years, which we secured previously through a procurement exercise, and in accordance with that current contract, we extended the arrangement for one further year, which takes us up to March next year. Committee will be familiar with RSM, they'll be familiar with the reports and the quality of the work we've had during that period, but also they'll be aware that there are alternative providers for internal audit services that exist both regionally and more locally. So the officers, with that in mind, have undertaken some exploratory work and contacted neighbouring councils, and there'll be some councillors in the room today who will be familiar with the work that Assurance Lincolnshire do. So Assurance Lincolnshire, for those who don't know, is a fully hosted internal audit service provided by Lincolnshire County Council. So it's an in-house team paid for on the payroll by Lincolnshire County Council. So it's not a trading company. It is a shared service in that sense. And they offer internal audit services to a range of different customers, and we've given a snapshot of some of those customers in paragraph 1.4. You'll see there's a range there, not only of upper tier authorities, similar sized district councils to ourselves, but also town councils as well. So a wealth and a breadth of different stakeholders involved in the service. We've also appended a flavour of the kind of reports they're doing, and the assurance levels the council would receive if it chose to use Assurance Lincolnshire as its internal audit service from next year. As part of the preparation for today's meeting, the Chief Executive, myself and the Deputy Chief Executive invited the Head of Assurance Lincolnshire across to quality assess the kind of work the council would receive for if arrangement was put in place, and seek assurances about the quality, the resilience and the capacity of Assurance Lincolnshire taking on ourselves as a new client.
part of that feedback was Assurance Lincolnshire would like to receive confirmation relatively early in order for them to build up capacity within their team to be comfortable they could take on a customer of our size. So hence why we're having the conversation today rather than nearer the time of the contract expiry. So the recommendation is that we move across to Assurance Lincolnshire. Clearly, the option still exists for the council to go out on a formal tender process. The last time the council did that, RSM and Assurance Lincolnshire were the only bidders for it, and tentative conversations with RSM are such that they would seek to increase their fee because of the changes in, obviously, the market forces and the usual increases that they would have to incur by reflecting today's market prices. And obviously going through a procurement process is timely, a cost burden on the authority, and no guarantee that ultimately we'd end up with a different result to what we're suggesting today. So with that in mind, the cost quality conversations have taken place in readiness for today's debate. And councillors can be assured that we're satisfied as officers that we'll get a professional service that meets the needs of the organisation. And there may be councillors in the room today who also are seeing the services from Assurance Lincolnshire in other roles who could validate or pass a view as to whether they agree with that. So that's the recommendation. If it is agreed today, then clearly there will be a period of twin tracking both contractors effectively, because we need Assurance Lincolnshire to work with the committee and the council to prepare the audit plan in readiness for the 1st of April next year. And we'd also require RSM to fulfil the contract requirements of this year, fulfil the audit plan for this year, and also ultimately to present the annual audit plan report as they would expect to do at the conclusion of this current financial year. So there will be a requirement to keep the two in check over that period of time, and also obviously to manage a handover between the two parties as we move forward. So that's the recommendation. Happy to take any questions and other members may wish to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, I've met these people when chairman of the governance and audit committees around the county had meetings in Lincoln, and I was certainly impressed with the procedures that they went through. Are there any questions? Paul?
Yeah, thank you for that, Richard. Yeah, from my experience of Assurance Lincolnshire, I think they do a good job. I have got a question though. I think Richard's partly answered it to me privately. It's regarding the fee and the service that they provide. Could you just confirm, Richard, that they'll produce? We're not paying any more. I think they're going to do it for the same fee as what we pay the previous provider. And how does that compare? The service they're going to provide compared with the current authorities they serve? Obviously, North Kesteven, East Lindsey, West Lindsey, Boston, Gainsborough, Newark and Sherwood. Are they going to do a similar service for us? And is the fee that we're paying them comparable with what they're being paid by those other councils? And Alan's smiling, I don't know why. But.
I mean, the way the budgets are prepared for internal audit services are based on day rates effectively. So RSM will have a day rate based on the level of the officer who will be undertaking the work, and Assurance Lincolnshire have exactly the same model. I think they're actually slightly cheaper on day rate, but of course it depends on the breadth of the audit that we want them to do and the number of days they'll need to commit to undertake that audit. So what we're saying as officers is the budget allocation for this work will be the same irrespective of the deliverer of it, be it RSM or be it Assurance Lincolnshire, and we'll model the plan accordingly. So we've got a ceiling budget and we'll accommodate the hours that we need to deliver that within that budget envelope. So ultimately the council will not incur further costs by moving across. So the day rate though is the same across its customers irrespective of who they are.
Yeah, Michelle, I mean, I'm with that assurance, I'm quite happy to go with Assurance Lincolnshire. I think we'll probably get a better service going forward, and it'll be a good move for us. Thank you.
Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like to support the comments the councillor Wood just made. I know as a county councillor, obviously assure Lincolnshire, and they do offer a really good service actually, and they have built up a really good knowledge of all types and all levels of council, and the quality of the work that I've seen at the county council is certainly of a very high quality. So I would have no problems with them taking over the contract. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I clarify who owns or who controls Assurance Lincolnshire? I assume that as a county councillor, none of the county councillors in the room would need to declare an interest in Assurance Lincolnshire because it appears to be managed from the county council. Can someone?
They are, sorry, Michelle, they are, I don't know if you want to, but they are employees of the county council. So the relationship councillors have with those are the same as we've got at the council. It's a officer member relationship, but they are directly employed by the council as council officers.
Okay, so for avoidance of doubt, does anybody need to declare an interest? I'm looking at the monitoring officer.
Yeah, so Chairman, yeah, it is a county council run function. If you're county councillors, I would suggest it would be sensible to declare an interest. Obviously, it's always up to you whether you do so, but my advice would be to declare an interest.
Yes, Mark.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In that case, I will declare an interest as a Lincolnshire County Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and so will I. I hadn't realised until I got here that I have had such a keen interest. And I was going to say, I just got used to the RSM reports and I kind of just got comfortable with them. And now we're going to get a slightly different report, but hopefully saying the same thing and equally understandable. In paragraph 1.2, we say how much it costs at the moment. I can't see the paragraph which says how much it's going to cost under Assurance Lincolnshire. I assume that despite the interest of the councillors in the room, that the services are offered without fear or favour, that the staff at Assurance Lincolnshire have absolutely no interest in supporting one view which might be favourable to one council against any others. It's as if we were going out to market. But the Director of Finance, I think, said that last time we went to the market, we only got bids from RSM and Assurance Lincolnshire. And this time we have been consulting with other potential providers in paragraph 1.3. So why didn't we? The reason why I'm nervous of this and why I'm inclined to either abstain or vote against is that I don't understand why we didn't go out to tender, why we didn't go out for a formal procurement process. Is it because it's too much of a rigmarole, or is it because we trust these people like our own brothers or sisters, or is it just convenience? I don't get that. Thanks.
There are very few people, very few companies that do this sort of work. Richard, would you?
Yeah, just in terms of the fee, Mr. Chairman, hopefully I explained previously that the fee, the council ultimately can decide what the budget is. If the council wants 100 audits to be done by Assurance Lincolnshire will say, okay, that's a number of days at this rate, I need a budget of X. So what we're suggesting is that the budget will be exactly the same, so there's no additional cost onto the authority. And Assurance Lincolnshire, if they are appointed, would work with the members and the officers to present an audit plan within that budget, which will be largely driven by the number of audits we want to do and the number of days we agree with them to assign to those particular audits. So we work it within that budget envelope. So it's in that sense, it's confined by the budget. So we all know when we go into the audit plan exactly how many days will be allocated to it. We know exactly the day rate that will be charged for it. So therefore we can be assured there is no creep on the amount we ultimately spend, so we can cap it in that way. The report isn't suggesting, or rather is suggesting, here's an opportunity to work with a quality or internal audit service that has got a track record of providing quality internal audit services, of which a number of our partners locally are receiving and have positive feedback in respect to the service they're providing. And we can directly engage with them without the need to go through a procurement process. If the will of the committee is we still would like to run a procurement process and ultimately discuss the findings of those, then that's perfectly reasonable to recommend and agree, and Auditors will work on that basis. What we're proposing is that based on where we were 5 years previously, the market is incredibly tight. The prices in the private sector market are increasing, and with the great respect to the council, it is a small district council which doesn't have a wealth of private sector internal auditors around it. So that usually will lead to quite a costly bid that would come in. And of course, the council can receive that and then consider it. Last time we did that, we had the incumbent provider bid and we had Assurance Lincolnshire bid. So the market noises are we probably have the same result, and we could have larger prices coming through for the same outcome. But it is something that could be considered, but obviously a procurement process is a process that needs to be resourced and managed by officers. What we're suggesting is here's an alternative which we use a quality provider without the need of going through a procurement process.
So thank you, Chair. If I might follow that up and being cautious in my words, in 1.3, when you say we have been consulting with other providers to explore opportunities, has that consultation included a conversation with RSM, for whom I'd like to say I'm grateful for the work they have done, but I welcome your words and I'd be content to carry on the way that you or who's written this report, Councillor Stokes, to continue the way that Councillor Adam Stokes is proposing. Thanks.
Yeah, just to confirm, yes, we have been in conversation with RSM throughout. They're perfectly excited on this. They're perfectly aware of our conversations. They are very, very supportive of the way forward. And as I say, they're very amenable to working with Assurance Lincolnshire and the council. This is what the will of the committee is, to ensure there is a seamless transfer between the two. But they are absolutely excited on the proposal. And as it turns out, there are no items for them today, which probably enables us to have a more open conversation than had there been here. But they're absolutely aware of this.
Right, well, I'd like to propose the recommendation on page 37 from the chair. Have I a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it, Mr. Chairman.
All those in favour?
Having declared the interest, perhaps I'd rather abstain than vote for.
I must admit, I was a little bit concerned about that. I'm not sure whether you're allowed to vote. Perhaps I can have a ruling.
I would suggest that it's better not to vote in this case. That would be my recommendation because of the interest.
Thank you for that. Right, all those in favour again, without the two. We can vote. I think that has been carried. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to
Sorry, Chair, I would like my abstention recorded because we've been through all this, and so I think Councillor Whittington and I, it should be recorded.
I think because I've also declared an interest, just so anybody looking through would know, that both myself and Councillor Baxter have declared interest, and we both have formally abstained from voting based on that interest. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sure that our democratic officer is making a note of that. Right, where are we? Item 7. It's the Counter Fraud Annual Report. Richard to present this, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee is asked this afternoon to approve the Counter Fraud Annual Report for 2021 and also to approve the work plan for the current year up to March 22. Just going through some highlights from the report. First section we've talked about is the whistleblowing, which is a hotline that's managed on our behalf by Lincolnshire County Council. It's an anonymous hotline that has a 24-hour recordings arrangement on it. Obviously, it's obvious for all to see that the number of referrals via the hotline to the council are higher than our neighbours. And we've tried to understand better the reasons for that, and there won't be one simple answer because each council has its own slightly a different arrangement. We've ultimately outsourced a lot of the hotline arrangements so to preserve the integrity of the council and the complainants. Some councils have internal whistleblowing arrangements and are supplemented by the county council arrangement, so that'll account for some of the distortion. We have a number of staff related matters that seem to be going through the whistleblowing hotline rather than coming to our internal teams. And again, that might be because staff feel more comfortable talking to an external individual. But for whatever the reasons, that's the information. Every single whistleblowing matter raised is logged by the county and is acted on by officers here where it's possible to do so. Clearly, some of them are anonymous, and therefore some of the information is not very detailed, and therefore there's frustration about how we can actually progress them. But every single one is followed through as much as we can, and you'll see paragraph 3.5 a breakdown of the type of concerns that are raised through the whistleblowing. There is a particularly sensitive whistleblowing matter that the council is dealing with, which is in 3.7, and we've tried to give as much detail as we can. But unfortunately, because we're in a public meeting, I can't go into any more detail at this point in time because it's going through a police process. But once the outcome of that has been decided and agreed, I've turned into Nicola, then we'll bring back the findings of that, but more importantly, the lessons learned and the actions that have been taken to mitigate that concern going forward. Members will be aware we're part of the Counter Fraud Partnership, which is Lincolnshire wide, and we contribute to that. Again, the county council members in the room may be familiar with the Counter Fraud Partnership workings and how all the districts work with the county council collaboratively to highlight potential fraud and risk issues that facing councils, such as cyber fraud, spams, things like that. Cyber attacks, so that intelligence is shared across the partners accordingly. A big part of the counter fraud work is single person discount review. This is where council taxpayers can declare a single person occupancy, and they then attract a 25% discount on their council tax. So that's based on a self-referral basis. So what the counter fraud team are doing is periodically testing those single person declarations using other sources of intelligence around registrations of different names within the same property to highlight where potentially there could be a fraud issue arising from it. And you'll see that is particularly successful at driving down fraud, and ultimately, of course, it results in a financial increase back to the respective council because the discounts removed, and therefore the full council tax becomes payable again. So that is particularly successful, and you'll see in the report there's a recommendation from the Counter Fraud Partnership that becomes a rolling review rather than an annual one. So we're all the time cleansing the data and all the time cleansing the discounts that are being applied. Another big part of work is the National Fraud Initiative, which obviously the council again participates in, and that's looking at similar mismatches between individuals and how they're declaring particular discounts or accessing particular benefits, and data matching that and asking the council to data match it with its records to see whether or not, again, there's inconsistencies. So again, the council proactively participates in that. I think also 2021, it's worth just reflecting on the amount of grants and payments the council was being asked to administer on behalf of government. And we've talked about two particularly in the report. One is test and trace payments, where individuals who are being asked to self-isolate could access £500 for that period of isolation. Again, there were a number of checks and balances that were had to be introduced to ensure that any claim for that was appropriate, accurate, and in keeping with the government's requirements, such as having PCR test number references and things like that, and photographic evidence of the request to self-isolate. And also the other big part of the work last year was the government grants for businesses to access for the periods of closure. And there were particular requirements around fraud detection and prevention that the government were insisting were put in place to ensure monies leaving the council were going to appropriate and organisations and businesses that met the criteria that was set out in it. So you can probably reflect on the kind of urgency of getting the grants out the door, but tempering that with the making sure that ultimately as public money, it was going appropriately to the right recipients. And you've probably read headlines where there has been nationally some concerns raised about the levels of fraud that potentially were in the system due to the need for local authorities to respond quickly to that. But we can go into more detail about the fraud measures that were put in place to mitigate that if the committee so wish. In terms of the action plan, at the meeting in December, we'll bring you the new counter-fraud strategy, which will take us forward from April 22. There's a requirement to roll out fraud training that will be for officers and for members, unfortunately due to all the pressures that was delayed from the 2021 year, but we're bringing that forward into the remainder of this year. We'll continue to be a partner of the Counter Fraud Partnership and take the learning from that and share the intelligence where we need to. And we'll continue to participate in the National Fraud Initiative and receive those data downloads from government and do data matching where we need to. That's just a kind of an overview and a flavour of some of it. Tracy's here and Alison's here as well, who have involvement in some of the areas I've talked about, and between us we'll be able to answer questions, hopefully, if any members have any. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview of what you've been doing in the past year and the future one. And I shall certainly look forward to the action plan going on to the December programme.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Richard. Thanks for this report. Just two things I want to raise. The first one, obviously, does refer back to the number of referrals that we're getting, obviously, which you've identified is very, very high. And you kind of alluded in your presentation that there may be other routes that other councils use for fraud to be reported. I'm just wondering if we've sort of tried to check with other authorities around that to sort of check that out. And also, when we've actually received these whistleblowing allegations, have we sort of done any work around asking the people making the allegations why they chose that particular route of using the reporting line? Is that because we've got no other way of doing it? It's just to try to understand how it may be that other councils are getting the same level of allegations, but they're just coming via different routes, just to understand, the actual route. And the second one is around how we investigate fraud, because I'm just and really this is kind of around COVID as well. Pre-COVID, what was the sort of the standard way of investigating these sort of fraudful allegations? Was it just by reviewing documents and whatever? Was there an element of face-to-face interviews associated with it? And potentially how post-COVID has that changed, or has it changed? If you understand, because obviously where with more staff working from home, has it actually changed the nature of how we conduct the investigations? Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
So, yeah, just in terms of whistleblowing, I mean, obviously, when we receive the annual figures from, these are collated by the County Council, by the way, these aren't figures we collate ourselves, but when we did receive those, we did try to probe into the differences, because clearly it looks quite significant. Although, to be fair, when you look, 23% of ours are coming from the fact that we are an HRA authority. So that's nearly a quarter of them coming from that. And clearly not all of the partners have got HRA. So, for example, Boston haven't, West Lindsey haven't, etc. So when you look at City of Lincoln, for example, who does have an HRA like us, they are at 20. So there's a danger we're not comparing kind of apples with apples when we look at that comparison. But those ones that have got low numbers, then there is an element of the fact that they do have different arrangements in place internally. So one of them, which I'm not going to name, does have a kind of confidential staff hotline that is manned by the HR team, but is done in a very confidential way. And we have some staff who are, for the current period at least, are feeling more comfortable going through this as a route because they're not aware that they can access our HR team through a different route. So there are subtleties that lead us to a different conclusion. And to be fair, you know, I guess any report that's coming through is welcome in the sense that people feel able to present a concern, knowing that it will be fully investigated. And you know, we're debating it today, that none of these are hidden away or dismissed. Every single one, Tracy receives the information, are investigated as much as they possibly can. I mean, going on to the other point about pre and post COVID, all these are done via a third party. So actually our response has been exactly the same, irrespective of the fact that the pandemic has kind of happened in terms of the level of investigation that we give it. So, for example, the one I'm referencing in 3.7 has taken an awful lot of resource to get to the bottom of it, and indeed we appointed external investigation officers to help Tracy and others actually get to the heart of the issue, because the nature of these sort of complaints tend to be a really headline grabbing comment without a lot of substance, and some of the frustrations are they're anonymous, which means we can't go back and say you've said this, but actually we need some more to help us investigate it. And they're the frustrating ones, because there may be some real concern that's valid in the accusation that's being made or the comment being made, but we can't get the information that we need because we can't go back to the individual. But that one, particularly in 3.7, we threw literally everything at it to get to the bottom of it, which is resulting in a criminal prosecution. So that ultimately is a positive outcome, because there's incredibly strong lessons learned, and control weaknesses that were identified have now been rectified and put in place. So it is important it works, and it's important that people who access it feel confident that it's going to be taken seriously and it's going to be investigated fully to the ability that we can. But the pre and post, it hasn't really changed anything, because the level of resource we're putting towards these issues has been consistent throughout the period.
Thank you for that answer. Are there any of these that are malicious and not worthy of investigation? Because there must be some people, because it's a hotline where they don't have to disclose the name, can make these sort of comments and put you to a lot of work unnecessarily.
From memory, no, we haven't had anything through that's malicious. and usually the county will triage the whistleblowing allegations when they come in. So no, I can't think of any that have been malicious, not in those numbers, not over the last few years, to be fair.
Thank you. That's just a thought. Councillor Wood.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just first as a minor point, on the recommendation, it refers to the proposed work plan. I assume that's the action plan listed on page 97. Yeah, and on the action plan, it talks about the counter fraud strategy that's coming back to the committee in December. That's good. I just wondered that strategy, I don't know if I picked it up right. Is that a strategy specifically to South Kesteven, or is it a strategy that's agreed with the partnership? So that is it one Lincolnshire-wide strategy that we adopt, and we'll come back to this committee, which is nodding his head, yes. And the other thing which I noticed on the actual work plan for this committee, it talks about the counter fraud annual report coming back in December, but isn't that what we're discussing today? So is it coming back in December, or is it another report, or is that just an error? A bit.
I just let Tracy coming on the counter fraud strategy work, because we are engaged with Lincolnshire counter fraud team about the development of that. But Tracy will just develop that a little further.
So historically, we've had our own strategy, which we've reviewed every 2 years in accordance with the terms of reference. But the partnership have worked on revising and reviewing their own framework. Well, County Council have. And they have just this week shared their draft framework. And the suggestion is that the partnership are able to use that. It will need tweaking in places, but they've given us guidance along those lines. I had that some weeks ago. So the intention is that the framework, we're going to be calling it the framework, when it comes back, will be based on a partnership-wide kind of template pro forma, if you like, but there will be elements of it that are unique to us. So it's that, yeah, true partnership working.
There being no further questions, I'll move the recommendation on page 91. Have I a seconder? Thank you. Jackie? All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. So we can go on to agenda item 8, the strategic risk register. This again is Richard. You're doing well today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we brought the risk register to the meeting back in February, and we agreed an action which was to go away and develop the controls and the mitigation actions to progress the risk register and to drive down the residual risk the authority faces. So Appendix A is the updated register itself. You'll see we presented the residual score, which effectively is the council's exposure to the risk after those controls have been put in place. But what we've also done is expand where we believe those controls need further strength, or there are further actions that need to take place to supplement or complement those actions to a greater extent. So that far right column, if you like, is the latest iteration of those actions required. And what we've presented is, alongside each of those, an implementation date. What you're not seeing in that is at CMT, the corporate team, we've assigned an accountable officer also to each of those. But in terms of presentation, we're just mindful we didn't want to declutter too much that A4 landscape kind of presentation. So what will happen if the committee accepts they are the controls and they are the next actions that are necessary? then the software the authority purchased last time called For Risk will be loaded accordingly with those actions, and those assigned officers and those assigned dates will be set up in the system to ensure the authority can track and monitor implementation against the agreed dates, and also by exception where dates are missed or there are changes to those, then again the committee will be cited and be fully kept up to date with those. Just worth reflecting that the council a while ago took a thematic approach to risks rather than the line by line risk category, and that's when we moved it from a corporate risk register to a strategic risk register. And the themes allows the council to move particular issues in and out as they arise during the course of the year, and they're under broader headings than they were previously. So it enables the register to be more fluid than it was previously. In terms of today's report, we're not proposing or recommending any new risks are added under those themes. Our view at the moment is they're still fit for purpose and still appropriate, but clearly as the council moves through the next few months, then those risks may need to be refined or updated to reflect the environment that we find ourselves in. But for now, we're proposing and recommending that those risks stay as they are, and those actions that have been worked through with officers are appropriate and proportionate to the exposure that the council is facing. Of course, what we can't do in all cases is eliminate the risk. The objective here is to mitigate that risk down as much as we possibly can. And I think at the end of the agenda item itself, there is a risk matrix just so members can re-familiarise themselves as how risk scoring is done by the authority in terms of impact and likelihood. So what we're trying to do, of course, is move everything away from the red as much as we possibly can into the amber and green, proportionate to the size of the risk the authority is facing. So that's the purpose of the report. And as I say, it comes to the committee on a 6 monthly basis. So we'll be coming back in 6 months' time with an updated position. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. I'll try to speak to the microphone because it's difficult because I normally like to face people I'm speaking to. It's very, very difficult. But yes, thanks, Richard. Very, very good report, actually. I have to say, I mean, I've worked in, obviously, as an accountant for many years. This is one of the best risk reports I've actually seen in terms of, the way it's laid out and the comprehensiveness of it. My question really is around the risk matrix and the scoring of the risk matrix, because all of the risks have got a likelihood of 2, which I'm guessing you have to go for because 2 is saying possible, and any risk is possible. So I can understand why that's there. And obviously the impact, you can judge the impact on, I guess in there's a subjective element there, but I'm just wondering who actually does the risk scoring within the council. Is it Tracy and her team? Is it the department? Is it the area concerned? Is it somebody in finance? And what sort of control and what sort of challenge is in there? Because somebody might come and say, well, I think that, the impact of this is a 3. Somebody might say, well, actually, I think the impact's a 4. And I just want to understand really the dynamic as to how the residual risk score is drawn up, and internally what challenge there is to that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, ultimately, the risk register, in terms of the management of it, is dealt with at the most senior level, which is the corporate management team, because these are the strategic risks the authority is facing. So these are based on the conversations and debates that have been had and led by the chief executive and the corporate team. Ultimately, they're coming here for debate, and the committee is perfectly entitled to challenge or question whether or not that rating is correct and appropriate. Of course, there is a level of subjectivity in that because somebody's interpretation of critical may not be the same as somebody else's. So there is a level of subjectivity. Clearly, the subtlety of the 3 and the 4 still puts that risk in the amber scoring. So you can see the amber is kind of a bit of a kind of set of stairs sort of shape. So irrespective of if it lands in the 3 or the 4 box, it'll still be an amber risk to the authority. But it is a professional view as to whether that if and when that risk fully materialised, what impact would it have? So, for example, risk 1 is obviously around the internal control framework, which obviously spans the whole authority. So that's a pretty significant risk that ultimately, if the whole internal control framework collapsed, which is why we have people like Grant Thornton and internal audit kind of testing and doing some assessments on those controls and making sure they're fit for purpose and appropriate and proportionate. Clearly, if that did ultimately fail, then potentially that is a critical failure, which would have significant implications for the authority reputationally, financially, and everything else. So that's why that one's sitting at that level. But as I say, it is relatively subjective. It is done though at a senior level and debated in the way that we're discussing it now. But ultimately, those debates have concluded that these scores are where the management team believe the risk sits. But as I say, the committee are obviously perfectly entitled to challenge those or propose changes to those scores.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, and thank you for this. Beginning to understand it each time it comes through. I did look for some particular issues within there, and I wonder how they get from, if they're on our risk register, how they translate into what happens. And I eventually found achieving council transformation is the place that we would look for something like a pandemic. It says under current circumstances, the issues of COVID. So I guess there's no end to the number of things you could put on here, but if one was looking for the impact of, say, a pandemic or the impending catastrophe of climate change and severe weather events, or even a fuel crisis, which is perfectly possible. How does when the crisis emerges, whether it's a fuel crisis or a food crisis or anything else, how do we take this and say, right, now we know what to do, we plonk this in? So that's the first question. The other thing is things that I didn't really notice, and it's that within the report, it fails to identify the maintenance of leisure centres. I can see that leisure centres is now high up on one of the lists now, but with all the risk registers that we've had in the past, we didn't manage to spot that maintenance of leisure centres was potentially catastrophic in terms of reputation and service delivery. And we've got the same situation at Bourne as we have at Deeping, in that we don't seem to be sure about the lease between the county council. So unfulfilled or unsigned leases with other third parties is an issue. The absence of a void policy for housing. We've been promised a void policy for years for housing, and it still hasn't arrived. I don't know where that is on here. We're not taking any action, or we seem to be taking very limited action on house building or the use of money within the housing revenue account. I don't know where that is in here, other than in terms of the social housing regulator. And then other things that we might spot, such as the Grantham University accommodation. I'm not sure what's happening with the university accommodation above the cinema, nor the downstairs premises, which is presumably a loss of income to the council, which we should be recognising as either an impact or a risk. We've got Gravitas housing situation where it hasn't quite delivered what we expected it to deliver. How does all that kind of practical problems fit into the risk register? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think there is a distinction between specific projects and policy formation that's not where it needs to be, and how that's being responded to, mitigated against, and dealt with, and this, which is the strategic register of the whole authority. So it doesn't tend to go into specifics as the examples are given, but what it's trying to do is take that broader context. So I think a number of the ones that have been referenced under number 4, which is the resilience of the authority, you'll see references around capital, for example. So it talks about development of capital plans, making sure there's a capital strategy, making sure the plans are deliverable. For example, it talks about the need to ensure there's an up-to-date asset management plan, there's an asset management review, which would drive through some of the issues around making sure maintenance on our assets is up to date, making sure we're investing in the assets in a timely way, keeping them value for money, delivering that. It talks about the need to do capital scoring and appraisal, which would then start to mitigate and drive out aspirational budgets that actually then, when it comes to delivery, there's some difficulties that are identified. So these are trying to, in a broader context, without being specific about individuals, because the danger of going down into individuals is the plan becomes out of date quite quickly because it's an in-the-moment issue and then we've moved on. So what the register is trying to do is take an overview, but using some of the examples given as the triggers to say there's an issue around potentially assets. How are we going to mitigate that issue? So the response is that we need an up-to-date asset management plan. We need to make sure capital bids that come forward are robust. We make sure there's delivery plans under each of those asset management, under each of those capital projects. We need to make sure the finances are in place. We need to make sure they're resourced properly as projects. So these are the responses under this register that hopefully over time will mitigate where there's perceived failures or delays in some of those ambitions and frustrations that have been referenced. So I don't know if that answers it, but what it's not doing is going into specifics. What it's trying to do is take a broad overview and put in place plans and mitigations that ultimately will mean those examples given don't occur in the future.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure that answers the question. Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much.
I'll let you speak.
Thank you. Talking about assets and asset management plan, I'd like to confirm that is now part of my portfolio, as you'd well know, and we are progressing with that. We are progressing in that light with a meeting which is scheduled in early October to actually identify 2 particular tranches. The first one, the primary one, are those assets that are freehold and indeed some of them as leasehold that could generate capital for such needs as the council currently has. And secondly, we are looking at we're looking at those that generate income which the general fund particularly relies upon. And we are looking upon both of those strategies by the ways that we can maximise the benefits to the council, both from the disposal of some assets for such things as the new depot and indeed for the works that will be needed at Market Deeping, and indeed those that as a landlord we have arrangements in place that we need to actually examine possibly their extended arrangements so that the worthfulness and the value is of the maximum asset that we are actually dealing with. So I hope that might be helpful and that it might actually be a forecast that this is actually taking place. And I thank you for the opportunity, Chairman, of allowing me to say so.
Thank you. I think Councillor Baxter would like to come back now.
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm grateful for Councillor Reid's attendance. While he's here, would it be possible to ask him where is the voids policy that we've been promised for probably years now? And secondly, what works are you talking about at Market Deeping?
Can I stop you there? I don't think that's relevant to this strategic risk register. If you'd like to have a consultation after the meeting, I think that is more appropriate.
Well, I mean, Councillor Reid has obviously got something to say about market deepening. I just wondered what he was talking about.
Well, perhaps he should not have mentioned it earlier. I'm not going to carry on. Councillor Wood.
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate this is a strategic risk register, so it can't go into the details of every little thing, but I am concerned about assets, and I know Richard mentioned assets. I was also concerned that obviously in the auditor's report, district audit, he talked about significant risk being valuation of land and buildings. Well, obviously how well buildings are maintained does affect the value of them. And the council does own a significant number of buildings. And say, I'm not going to go into specific details about that building or that leisure centre, but if you take the whole lot, all our buildings that the council owns significantly and all the leisure centres, it is essential that we maintain them. And I say, district order identified that as a significant risk to land and the valuation of them. And the valuation, obviously, it depends what they are, where they are, but also how well they're maintained. If they're not maintained well and they're falling down, they're going to have not very much value. And I think it's quite clear. I certainly pick up that we have a lack of maintenance on our assets. So at what point, it's probably a question to you, Richard, at what point do they become a strategic risk? I'd have thought we're getting to the point when our assets are becoming a strategic risk and maybe ought to be included. At what point would you include those on the strategic risk register?
I think just separate the two out. The Grant Thornton audit plan is identifying that as a theoretical risk that they will seek to eliminate out through their audit, and that's the work they're doing currently. So they're not suggesting there's an issue in that area. They're saying that's a risk to the council because of the size of the number on the balance sheet. And we'll learn more when they've finished their audit as to whether they've found any particular issues around how the council's valuing those assets through the arrangements it has in place. I think in terms of, clearly we all know there's a particular issue with one of the assets the council, although it doesn't own, it manages. And that's a whole separate conversation I don't really want to get into. But yes, as the council read says, that there is a particular reference in here to having a up-to-date, accurate asset management strategy and plan that ensures the assets of the council are well maintained, inspected regularly, invested in where appropriately, and we're fulfilling our landlord duties where necessary. And that plan, that strategy needs to ensure those things happen. The work's clearly underway in respect of that, and I guess we'll wait to see the outcome of that work and whether the outcome is such that we do need to escalate and elevate that further. And of course, by the way, we're going through budget setting, so the budget setting work we're currently undergoing at the moment may yield requests and requirements to invest in assets that perhaps we haven't done so in the past. We'll need to wait and see as the process continues whether that becomes a reality. So I guess without putting words in your mouth, it is still at the moment a theoretical risk because that work that Councillor Rees talked about hasn't yet concluded. At that point, when those works that survey's been done and each of the assets in turn have been reviewed and scrutinised, then we may end up coming back and saying, actually, this is a significant challenge to the authority. It's likely to be a financial issue rather than anything else, because it may be there is significant sums of money needed to be invested in those assets, which ultimately might turn to a different conversation is, do we want to retain those assets? Do we want to invest in them, or do we want to do something differently with them? So I think it's a sequence of events, but I think we're all recognising that it's a piece of work that's critical and ultimately might mean the council has some decisions it needs to make in the future.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Richard. It was just that I'm sort of recognising the potential risk coming up to us. That's all. Thank you for your answer, Richard.
Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think actually, as following the conversation, because I think Council was identified a point here, which is this kind of dynamic between strategic risks and operational risks. Because I think a lot of the risks that Councillor Baxter referred to are sort of more operational risks as opposed to strategic risks. But obviously councillors get approached by members of the public, not on, we wouldn't get approached by, oh, what's your view on the council's cultural strategy, say? Whereas a resident might contact us to say, oh, I went to use Grantham Leisure Centre and the change room was dirty. So that's a kind of an operational issue. And obviously councillors, I think, whilst we appreciate that we can't micromanage everything, there are a lot of operational risks that do take place that we become aware of and do have an impact. And I'm guessing that the next level down under the strategic risk register is an operational risk register at some point within the council. So I'm just wondering how that is processed through, because I'm imagining quite a lot of the stuff that Councillor Baxter raised potentially would be on that. And internally, how the officers kind of manage that with the executive. But at some point, some kind of feedback process to backbenchers, because obviously, as I say, I've never been approached yet about the policy, our sort of cultural strategy, but I may be approached around an issue at the Guildhall Theatre or the Mears Leisure Centre. So just trying to understand that dynamic, I think, might be quite useful, and how these operational risks, because potentially if you have an awful lot of operational risks, I think as Councillor Wood was alluding to, all of a sudden they do become a strategic risk, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The risk management strategy sets out the different roles across the organisation and where each of the risks are managed across the organisation. Clearly, the terms of reference of this committee are to manage the strategic risks. The operational risks sit within the heads of service and the directors within the service areas. So they're operationally managed, and they could be everything from IT issues, staff resilience, succession planning, system failures, printers not delivering on time, whole range of different things that clearly we want to bother committees' time with, because they are dealt with at that operational level. What also happens is there's a group called the Risk Management Group, which is an officer-led team, which actively review those operational risks, and potentially, and what can happen is some of those operational risks become a thematic risk across the organisation that can then manifest themselves onto the strategic risk register. So for example, if across the board there's a concern around health and safety, for example, that's becoming an operational risk across the organisation, then by its very nature it becomes an organisational wide risk, not a service specific risk. And those ones would then escalate through to the register that you've got today. But in the main, the operational risks are dealt with by the services. Of course, what's also in place in those areas is business continuity plans and emergency plans. So they are in place to deal with unforeseens, and Councillor Baxter referenced a few in his question around things that we didn't know about and have appear. So clearly, in terms of the impact of COVID and everyone working from home, then the business continuity plans kicked in straight away, because they are based on different scenarios and different ways of working, and whether or not there's an IT disaster or people are prevented from coming into the offices, or all sorts of different scenarios are tested. But that's obviously not the remit of this report, but those are also in place. So a good source to understand, if you like, those different layers is the risk management strategy, because it sets out the different roles and responsibilities between officers and members at the various levels of the organisation.
It also goes down further than that, Richard, to say we have an accident report every year, don't we? Which is following on from the risk room. Any more questions from anybody? No. Well, I'll move from the chair the recommendation then that we note the contents of the report and we approve the updated strategic risk register as in Appendix A. Am I a seconder? Thank you, Jackie. All those in favour? Nobody against? We'll go to agenda item 9. I believe Carol Drury will be making her presence known with this report, having waited for so long.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman. I'm here today to present the annual report relating to safeguarding for 2020 to 2021 for review and for noting by this committee. The document discusses the safeguarding review we undertook internally last year. One thing to note from that, in the review, we highlighted a single point of failure in having one person identified as a safeguarding officer. To address this, we now have, aside from me as operational lead for safeguarding, an identified, proactive and very involved strategic lead in Ken Lyon, and 2 deputies, Katie Conway in neighbourhoods team, works out of Mobeck House. So we've got a resource at the depot as well as in the council officers, and Beth Turner, who works in housing services. The document also provides an overview of our general responsibilities to safeguarding and prevent. I should say that whilst prevent is counter-terrorism, it does sit within our safeguarding responsibilities because it is in essence about helping to prevent people from being groomed into extremism. There's a section around COVID-19, just a paragraph that provides a brief overview about the adaptations that were made and guidance that was provided in how we could continue to interact with our residents, albeit in a different way. Obviously, we couldn't do things face to face, so we had to find alternative ways of identifying risks that would normally present if we visited a property. Obviously, we couldn't do that, so we needed to work out the nuances of how to find that within phone calls and perhaps Zoom meetings, etc. In terms of training and development, you'll see that officers completed 200 modules of safeguarding training during 2020-21, and the document lists the variety of modules undertaken. It goes on to talk about training for elected members. In March 2020, Cabinet made the decision to make safeguarding training for elected members mandatory across the time of office. It grieves me to say that the report points out that only 8 of our 56 members have actually completed any of the required training to date. It is, other than the first year, it is actually 1 training module a year in your term of office. And each module can take between 30 and 45 minutes. So it's not an enormous ask. In previous years, we've simply provided detail on the number of referrals made to children's services or adult services. This year, under the section entitled Safeguarding Interactions and Interventions, you'll see we've also provided a number of short case studies so that members can see how those interactions happened in the first place and then the action that's taken. Obviously, this can be simply getting additional support for people or families right through to protection from harm. The section there also highlights the increasing issues we experience across our district in relation to hoarding. It's our number 1 issue around safeguarding of individuals at the minute. Just another couple of things to note. Every 3 years, we're required to undertake an assessment into our compliance with Section 11 of the Children Act. You'll see this was carried out in late 2020. This would normally be a 2-step process. We do a self-assessment and then moderated by a peer. In light of COVID, the moderation didn't happen in the same way this time, and only the statutory partners of within the partnership, that being Lincolnshire County Council, the police and the CCGs, were actually moderated. All of the other submissions by partners were subject to DIB test. The fantastic news is that our Section 11 self-assessment was accepted by the Strategic Management Board of the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and our assessment was green across all areas of that assessment, which is excellent. Very briefly then, just looking forward, next year, similarly to the Section 11, we also have to do a Lincolnshire assurance and assessment framework audit. This is an audit of our safeguarding responsibilities for adults. This one's not mandatory, but it is good practice to participate. And following on from the review that I mentioned at the beginning of this, we continue to investigate the use of a data management system called eSINs, which is used by community safety, police, health and other partners to centrally log safeguarding issues so that we're able to better identify themes and hotspots, and also so that information is available to relevant officers so there's no potential duplication of effort. I welcome questions if anyone has one, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Carol. Another comprehensive report, well delivered as usual. Are there any members record? Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Carol. Excellent report. I have to say I'm mortified, and I'm one of the guilty ones of the councillors who've not done the training, and I'm as guilty as I think the other 48 of us who've not done the training. What can you do to kind of get the message across to us that we need to do this? Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Reminders actually come out from member services that say urgent or action required. And then it talks about the safeguarding training. And they come from Sam Selby usually. If you'd like me to add my voice to that, I'm more than happy to also send you an email. But I'm sad to say I'm as easy to ignore.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Carol, for the report, which is quite moving, really. I criticised the poor old external auditor earlier for the kind of turgid and bland report that he's written, and this is not his fault. This is the opposite, and it reminds me why I got elected to be a councillor in the first place, really. I do confess that I don't think I assume, yeah, I'm one of the, you're keeping a list, aren't you? Yes. I would appreciate if you've got time after the meeting and perhaps with other members to show me how to get onto it, because if it's 45 minutes that I can do in the comfort of my own home, then I'd like to go ahead with that, because clearly it's interesting. Going back to the bit about whistleblowing earlier on, I'd like to sort of publicly commend Carol, because in the run up to the county elections, I got various anonymous emails from people, and one of them made allegations about safeguarding issues at SKDC, and although it was anonymous, I did follow it up, and as I would expect, Carol Drury came back and said, well, actually, the allegation was that the correct people hadn't been through the correct criminal records checks and so on. But the answer that I got from Carol Drury was comprehensive and showed that the authority is taking such obligations very seriously, and there is a system in place to make sure that everybody who is supposed to be checked for various safeguarding issues is, and I was reassured by that. And then the report itself, some of it is the numbers and the stats, but when you get into paragraph 5 about the actual impact on people's lives, this is what most appealed, that what we're doing in this chamber does have an impact on vulnerable adults and old people and young people and parents and mothers. And I mean, you could talk about, I'm sure we could talk about any of the individual circumstances and be moved to tears in many cases, I suppose. So thank you, Carol, for the reminder that what we're doing here is affecting people's lives. And although it's sometimes irritating to drive to Grantham or occasionally to drive to other parts of the district, it's really important what we do, and thank you for the focus on how it affects people's lives. Thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions? No. Well, I'd like to move again the recommendation from the chair that we have reviewed the safeguarding annual report and we note its contents. Very, very good, Carol. Seconder? Thank you, Jackie. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Well done. Microphone, I quite agree. Although I'm probably better off not heard. The work programme to which we've added the one from the minutes earlier on. I don't know whether there's any further thoughts on that. If you have, just notify me and I'll contact Richard and get something changed. Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. It was mentioned some years ago about this voids policy, and it was mentioned within the minutes of this particular meeting. I think it probably falls within the remit of the Rural and Communities Overview Scrutiny Committee to get that. But can you explain the process by which we ensure as a council that if we agree to get a policy, that policy actually arrives and in a reasonable amount of time?
That's a very good question. Richard.
I think from yeah, it's the go-to. I think it came through an internal audit report, the lack of the policy. So I think that's why it was here, this committee, that was initially referenced. But for me, it should go through the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Rural and Communities, in the same, because this committee isn't charged with that particular responsibility, but it needs to ensure that it signposts the appropriate committee and runs through the appropriate work plan and ends up being, you know, a deliverable. So I think that's why it's been debated here in the past. It's not clearly within the remit of the committee itself, but I think through an internal audit report, it's been identified as a weakness, but it would have been signposted on to Rural and Communities OSC. I can't really comment on what happened after that point, but I think that's why Councillor Baxter referenced it.
Can we not move a recommendation that this goes to that committee for their early submission to us of the required policy?
I'm not sure the policy itself needs to come here because this is the committee charged with governance. I think it's...
Councillor Reid, I think you've got your hand up. You'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I can confirm that, yes, I shall be giving an update to Rural and Communities. And I think we are all aware of the change in personnel that we've had within the housing department. And there has been a great degree of work and readjustments done to the policy or the policies that are coming forward so that they do exactly what is earnestly all in our hearts and our heads, which is to reduce the amount of time that voids take to turn around and that we get more people as quickly as possible into our empty homes. The work is there. And I have already listened to one intimation to this, and I will be able to brief questions in the appropriate place. I guess even at open council tomorrow, John.
Happy with that?
It's a satisfactory answer. I wouldn't say I was happy.
Right, that's the end of the meeting. I've got no other business that's been notified to me, so I'll declare the meeting closed